Χαίρετε και πάλι από την Αθήνα, να καλωσορίσω τους...
So once again, hello from Athens. I would like to welcome back our friends and also welcome our new friends who just joined us online. Now we would like to listen to what Professor Theodora Petanidou has to share. She is a professor with the Department of Geography in the University of the Aegean. She is also the head of the Laboratory of Biogeography and Ecology. She will talk to us about the contribution of terraces in mitigating the impact of climate change and drought. Over to you. Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me well. Yes, we can both hear you and see you clearly. Good, so thank you for hosting this significant event, and also I would like to thank you for this invitation. But now let's talk about terraces. There are more than 50 names in the Greek language for this specific structure. This is a horizontal graduated terrace built into the slope. They are support walls that do not need the use of mortar. They are a timeless tool for making use of land across the Aegean and across the globe, as a matter of fact, since the antiquity. And I'm talking about 6,000 or 8,000 years ago, terraces were used in the Mediterranean region. They are the most recyclable tool in the natural environment. They were built, rebuilt, and rebuilt again. Currently, in the Aegean, as well as in many other areas globally, these terraces have been practically abandoned. But now the time has come for us to revisit them because they will once again prove useful. Living in the Aegean Sea is both a bliss and a misfortune. It's a bliss because there is light, there's a healthy environment, it's practically germ-free and pollutant-free. It is an underutilized environment. It is a world similar to the ancient concept of space. But on the other hand, it is a misfortune. Living in the Aegean area can be a misfortune due to numerous factors, due to the lack of plains, due to the rocky, infertile land. The poet has dubbed this space as weak. There is infrequent precipitation, and in fact, rainfall is unnecessary when it occurs. These are all part of the misfortune. And in the course of time, these misfortunes were addressed through the use of terraces. But now, in the wake of climate change, we need to review terraces as a tool that belongs to both the present and the future. The terraces used to be an invaluable tool providing safety against flooding, piracy, while also creating a safer environment in general. This also gave rise to nutritional adequacy, safety across all islands that opted for this solution. And you know, there's a saying that is encountered in all islands. Your house needs to accommodate you, needs to be spacious enough so as to accommodate you, and your land needs to be vast enough to serve your needs. So terraces were widely used. They were a very popular tool that allowed people to feel safer. On the other hand, dry stone walling allowed to tackle rocky soil. This led to more fertile lands, greater productivity in terms of crops, and there were also other cases where bricks were used in piles. For example, you can see these lovely built brick piles, for example, from the French province. And also this is an example from Croatia, where terraces are used to tackle the weaker soil. You know, back in 1999, we started working on terraces within my lab, and we've identified the fact that on the island of Patmos there were both terraced areas and non-terraced areas. The non-terraced areas had a greater water runoff compared to terraced areas, either cultivated or not. They might have been scrublands, or they might have been cultivated areas. But this is something that needs to be taken into account. So terraces were a way to tackle weaker soil, a way to crush rocky soil while enabling people to create land and also enabling roots to go deeper in the ground. And on numerous occasions, people were actually forced to carry soil from far away and another way to tackle water scarcity was again terraces. Terraces allow rainwater to stay on terraced soil for longer time periods. In other words, this is a way to enrich underground aquifers. This is yet another lesson for us. Manolis Glezos, more than 3 decades ago, proved this experimentally in the village of Epirus. He used to tell us that he actually saw with in his very own eyes animals and plants returning to the area of Epirus after the reintroduction of terraces. Also, terraces enable humans through artificial choices to introduce cultivated crops and specific variations, thus adding to their available assets and increasing the wealth of flavors included in the pot. It goes without saying that Terraces are also a way to curb flooding. They contain rainwater, and we all know that flooding has become more frequent in recent years. Terraces may also be used as windscreens. People have this specific type of dry stone walling that is slightly higher than average. This allows the protection of plants that are more vulnerable to blowing winds. This is something that is more frequent in the northern Cyclades, for example, the island of Tinos or Andros, where heavy winds usually blow. Along with the terraces and windscreens, there were other types of windscreens, for example, the ordinary dry stone walling windscreens that should also be made use of, and we need to consider all of these available options as future solutions. Also, terraces facilitate a greater bioclimatic diversity in terms of space. Terraces allowed the creation of numerous microclimates within a single plot field. In fact, this is prevalent in Peru. You can see the example on screen. There are so many terraces within the same field that have allowed for the creation of numerous microclimates and the cultivation of numerous varieties. Terraces, therefore, are a useful practical tool that also gives rise to numerous structures, for example, man-made hives, churches, and so on. Also, there are different thresh areas, there are different shaded areas, thanks to the variety of terraces. You can see an example of beehives, bee nests here. This type of beehives are prevalent on the island of Andros because this is something that is not as frequent on other Aegean islands. So the dry stone terraces support biodiversity. Why is that? Because on and within these terraces, unique bioclimates are created, and there are some types of flora and fauna that can only thrive therein. You can see an example on the screen. There are different characteristics in terms of humidity, temperature, that are useful to different types of flora and fauna. Therefore, they are sites of protection, they are a site, a safe harbor rather, in terms of climate protection. Also, there are many groups of users that are inextricably linked to terraces. For example, the population of wild bees is one of them. And I would like to cite a study conducted a decade ago that demonstrated that on the island of Lesbos, even abandoned terraces accommodate a biodiversity of vegetation. However, this biodiversity is significantly lower compared to the one encountered in used terraces. This is significant because we are currently running a project on the island of Andros, and in addition to plants that actually benefit from the terraces, there is also the population of bees that benefit from terraces. In fact, we can increase the number of species of bees as well as their absolute numbers by using terraces. And this is helpful to all of us, not only in the wake of climate change, but also in terms of biodiversity. Therefore, terraces are an integral part of the landscape. Unfortunately, the sound is poor. So, we can make use of historical practices, and clearly terraces are a tool to safeguard cultural heritage not only on Aegean islands. Just note that it only takes humble materials to build terraces that have actually been inscribed on the National Inventory of ICH of Greece some years ago. In conclusion, terraces are a management tool allowing us to counteract poor climate practices and the climate change impact. 9 years ago, in 2013, the European Commission introduced a new term, green infrastructure. What is that? This is an umbrella term for different types of infrastructure allowing for increased quality of life. Terraces do fall within this definition of green infrastructure. They allow us to address climate extremes. They have been doing that for many years in the past. Why not make use of them in the present as well? We need to make them operational once again. They are there. There is no need for us to build anything from scratch. We do not need this type of contemporary green options as shown on the slide. The terraces on the left side of the slide are a tool that is there. And we all know that the Mediterranean region is one of the most vulnerable regions with reference to the climate change. So we need and we should make use of terraces. So this is what was in our mind before submitting a proposal to the European Commission. This gave rise to the Terracescape project within the LIFE program of the European Union. This project was launched in 2017. It is about to reach its end in the coming months. It involves the University of the Aegean, the Observatory of Athens, Professor Giannakopoulos is one of our partners, among others. Please visit our webpage so as to see for yourselves what we have already achieved and delivered. But why is it that we choose the island of Andros for this project? Because it is an island where terraces are very frequent. In fact, it is the island where most terraces are encountered. It is also home to beehives, like I mentioned earlier. The project's objectives was to demonstrate that climate adaptation is both feasible and sustainable. And also the other objective was to restore the terraces on at least 1,000 hectares and then an additional surface area. What is very important and innovative in Greece is the Land Oversight Agency. This land oversight involves the voluntary participation of different stakeholders, farmers who give their land to the project for its purposes. Other keys to achieve the project's objective, other than the Land Oversight Agency that is, were the introduction of products of high added value in terms of climate skills that was propagated to other Aegean islands, among others. What about our achievements? Like I said, we established the first participative land oversight in Greece. Also, we restored some walls supporting terraces. We have installed weather stations across the island, and we've also engaged the school community. We all remember the poor weather conditions on the day the school was involved. We had different on-site seminars as well as webinars. We had structural interventions. We had the certification of products. We've been monitoring biodiversity indicators involving flora and fauna. We've conducted an excellent architectural ethnographic study in the northern part of the island of Andros. We have created a decision-making tool for crops. This is about to be launched. And we've identified 5 islands where we will be restoring terraces. Among these islands are Delos and Sifnos. And we have prepared a documentary. I will screen a small clip afterwards. So our experience, our achievements, the challenges all partners faced will be shared during a one-day conference on June 30th in the Zographou University campus. We will be very happy to see you there. So we would like to share our experience. Hopefully you will draw upon it in governance projects in these difficult times. But before we sail and visit other islands, I would like to say one last thing. At the end of the project, an exhibition will take place in Kallidios Library on Andros. This is something that is a debt to the island of Andros. This exhibition will have three themes. The first theme relates to the past. You can see drawings created by a PhD candidate. These drawings, these paintings are part of an online app, gaming app. The second theme of the exhibition has to do with our own responsibility. After all, we are people who are aware of the significance of terraces. We are people who wish to convey this knowledge to others. It will be a token of appreciation to Andros. And the third exhibition, and it will involve a photo exhibition, a photo gallery. The third theme is our vision. It is an exhibition of selected drawings submitted in a nationwide contest among schools. At this point, I would like to thank our teachers, our educators, who inspired their pupils. In fact, I know that many such teachers walked along terraces and guided their pupils along these paths. And this exhibition of pupils' drawings actually captures the vision of pupils and is helpful for us to reach out to the community. And last but not least, like I've already mentioned, there is the production of a short documentary. Its duration is 26 minutes, and I would like to share a small clip of this documentary. May I? Please do.
Το αναβαθμιδωμένο τοπίο. Έργο ανώνυμων ανθρώπων, μεγαλειώδες, φτιαγμένο με τα ταπεινότερα υλικά του Αιγαίου. Υποστήριξε τη ζωή αμέτρητων γενιών σε νησιά απομονωμένα, σε τόπο άγωνο και ξερό. Κράτησε τη ζωή στα ψηλά μαζί με το πολύτιμο χώμα και το βιαστικό βρόχινο νερό. Ο γενέθλιος χώρος του πολιτισμού του Αιγαίου. Αυτό το έργο καταρρέει. Κινδυνεύει να εξαφανιστεί. Ανάγκη και χρέος μας η λειτουργική αποκατάσταση των αναβαθμίδων για να αντιμετωπίσουμε τις επιπτώσεις της κλιματικής αλλαγής. Ένα σύγχρονο εργαλείο για να το καταφέρουμε είναι η δημιουργία οργανισμού συμμετοχικής επιστασίας γης. Με άλλα λόγια, η διαχείριση της γης από κοινού. Στον οργανισμό συμμετέχουν εθελοντικά μικροϊδιοκτήτες γης και γεωργοί, παραχωρώντας για κάποιο διάστημα τα χωράφια τους. Με τη χρηματοδότηση του έργου Life Terrascape, λειτουργεί το πρώτο τέτοιο πείραμα στην Άνδρο, με τη φιλοδοξία να είναι επιτυχές, με μιμητές και σε άλλα νησιά του Αιγαίου και της Μεσογείου. Παραγωγή τοπικών προϊόντων με προστιθέμενη αξία, λειτουργικό αναβαθμιδωμένο τοπίο, ασπίδα για όσα προϊονίζει η κλιματική αλλαγή. Ένας φιλόδοξος μονόδρομος για ένα Αιγαίο με βιώσιμο μέλλον.
So, there is no time left. We should reclaim our own land that is filled with terraces, at least in the Aegean Sea, on the Peloponnese, and in many other places across Greece. And the Aegean is the area that will be mostly affected by climate change, for the benefit of the land itself, for the benefit of environment, for the benefit of our people. We need to revisit terraces and indeed restore them. Thank you very much. I know I abused the timeline, the time slot. No, thank you. Thank you because you were very optimistic, if I may say so. And I think that your presentation meets the presentation of Hannah Schreiber, because you both touched upon a management tool to address the scarcity of resources. But now it's time for us to welcome Dr. Kalliopi Stara, who is a researcher and holds a PhD in cultural ecology. She will talk to us about climate change and intangible cultural heritage, the sacred forests of Epirus. Over to you.
We'll be talking about climate change and intangible cultural heritage, talking about the sacred forest of Epirus in Greece. Now, Epirus, and I'm saying this for our foreign guests, is in the northwestern part of Greece. It is an area with great landscape diversity, a great value, both geological. It is included in the UNESCO Geopark network. It has great significance in terms of nature conservation. It is a natural park as of 2005. That incorporated two older national forests. We have 11 Natura 2000 sites protecting biodiversity of Europe, a biogenetic reserve, and also the area has a huge cultural value with many prehistoric sites, habitation sites, Byzantine and post-Byzantine churches and monasteries, 16th century buildings and traditional villages, a large network of stone bridges and other traditional constructs, which is why there is a proposal to include it in the UNESCO World Heritage Monuments as a cultural landscape in particular. Now, this story for me with the sacred forests, which I will explain what they are later, started in the year 2000 when I was doing my MS, my postgraduate studies. I saw that there were some areas where people did not lumber wood, did not fell wood, because they were afraid of some metaphysical punishment. Now, I continued my study. It was the subject of my PhD thesis, and between 2012 to 2015, we were involved in a project with the University of Ioannina. There were 38 scientists to discuss about the preservation of biodiversity. Since then, we're still working with them, and we're teaching about the sacred forest as a part of cultural landscapes, both in classes and curriculum of cultural ecology for undergraduate students of the University of Ioannina, as well as in classes for postgraduate students, primarily through summer schools. And here you can see some of the people who were involved in this, have been involved in this issue over these years. So, what is a sacred natural site? You can see cases from various areas of the world. As of 2012, we have Zauri in this database. So we have the sacred natural sites. This is how we call it in Greek. They are sites and areas, places in which a series of individual or collective representations define as points of particular spiritual interest and symbolic significance. We use the term sacred from the Latin term sacer and sacire, that means set apart, to set apart the sacred from the secular use. There is a host of cultural landscapes that may be defined as sacred. Here you can see the first such site in New Zealand. It was for the Maori inhabitants of the island. It was their sacred place, a sacred place where the mythical ancestor lived. There are various sacred mountains in China, in Japan, in Kyrgyzstan, in Greece. We have Meteora. These are some that are already included in the sacred cultural landscapes or mixed landscapes. We have some sacred forests. Here you can see Nigeria, in Kenya, Africa, but also the Holy Valley and the forests of the Cedars of God in Lebanon. Now, how many such sacred natural sites are there in Greece? Now, they're either solitary trees or groves related to churches, or outlying icon stands, and sacred forests that are larger forest-covered areas. Why were they created? Well, when we're talking about forests, because the character of trees next to churches has the significance of the of respect to the sacred place. But when we're talking about forests, most of them we have connection with adverse weather events. They act as a protective wood belts for the settlements. We have a steep slope. At its base, we usually have a village, and then we have a protective forest right over it. They can also work as a reserve, and I will explain what they are, as SNS of abandoned villages. They protect the village aquifer, and their use is multifaceted, which is why we have tax exemptions during the Ottoman occupation, which in Greece and in our area lasted for something like 500 years. Aesthetics and beauty are other reasons, festive places and places of recreation. They provided shade for livestock in the summer and also shelter during wartime. And we have quite a large number of such examples during World War II. When we're talking about total protection, we're talking about a small number of places such as Aegean Paraskevi. It is a community of lumberjacks. They have a forest where they touch nothing, and here on the right you see that there is a tree that they themselves protect, so that no bears will approach to eat the honey from the wild bees that nest within its bark. The key ingredient, as it were, of all these, or the common element of all these SNSs, is the fear of supernatural punishment that is not only existent in Christian Greece, but it's based on pre-Christian beliefs. They're based on the idea that trees have a soul. They are an organism that is inhabited by a demonic creature. And those who harm it or chop it or fell it will be met with evil. We have the story of Erysichthon. Erysichthon was a hero from Thessaly who chopped down the holy oak of the goddess Demeter, and he was doomed to eternal hunger, and he ate his own flesh. It is a very timely story, I would say, that we can show us a lot today about human greed and how we treat the planet. So this story was included in the school books by the 1930s, until the 1930s, in primary school textbooks. Some of the people whom I talked with and who helped with their knowledge to understand what these forests were knew what this was about. So as we heard in the morning, these sacred forests are a socio-ecological system that pertains to the management of the commons. We have a very few cases in which protection is total. And, as I said, we had this community of the lumberjacks in Vovusa. Most of the times we have management systems, and there is a series of people who are either the representatives of the local area or the church in the past, the local community representatives, and today it's either the government, the Forestry Service or the National Park who control this management. And we can see in this area that there are some exceptions. We see where the violations exist, and I was very happy to hear the previous speakers talk about similar things, and we published a thesis on their way of analysis, and it was the first such paper that has to do with the management of a sacred place as a common place, commonly used place. Now, all this managed to maintain it's a very good state, a fairly good state, all these areas, until as of today, when we rediscovered them. Here you can see on the slide an evaluation we made of 48 areas. We discovered approximately 90 such forests in Zagori. So in these 48 areas, we discovered that they had a very good level of management. However, we believe that they are endangered, as threats exist that may endanger their survival and existence in the future. And then these risks were the degradation, the lack of management, abandonment, and the lack of institutional protection, as it were. This is the reason why, and balancing and weighing what we have to gain and lose by giving them recognition and recognizability, because what we were afraid of and still are afraid of is tourism. That might come, but if we were not to do that, we feared that worse might happen, and that this system would be forgotten before we had the chance to rediscover it, because it was a system that was only known to the local communities that lived close to those forests. So in 2015, our proposal was approved, and the sacred forests of Zagori and Konica were inscribed in the National Inventory of ICH of Greece, with a synergy of many local agents and sectors and stakeholders, primarily the municipalities. So what do these forests have to do with climate change? Well, first of all, we found many of those forests that are called a different thing, meadows. A meadow is an open place where people have their animals graze, but here it is a different etymology. It's livas or livados, which means a water droplet. Like Mrs. Petanidou said so beautifully, they played a double role, which was the stop of the surface cut-off, We're here in western Greece, where we have a very high precipitation rate, which means that we have very long winters and harsh winters. We have problems related to landslides, more infrequently in the past years, avalanches, because it doesn't snow too much, that cause severe problems to the settlements and all infrastructures, roads, for instance. So the presence of these protective forests was a rather necessary thing, because as we know, both all trees existing there may be natural obstacles for landslides or rocks falling and dropping, and we have the sources at the foot of the mountains. Before the water network, these sources were what furnished potable water to the settlements, and when we know that this potable water comes from a sacred forest, then we drink it with even greater pleasure. Members of our team produced a model using as variables slope inclination, total annual precipitation, the percentage of high vulnerability, the percentage of forest coverage, and altitude, and they discovered that they could use this model to accurately predict that whenever we had a slope of high inclination and then a settlement underneath, we would have a sacred forest located there. I mentioned reserves earlier. Now, during all these long, harsh winters, the very few housebroken animals that were not allowed by the inhabitants to move, the transhumans, for them to be in during summertime in high mountains and in wintertime near the beach, then they would gather forest branches, and they used them to feed their animals in an area that, if this reserve was depleted, it was not possible for anyone to buy grass or hay. So there were some reserve sacred forests that were perennial. They were usually purnaria or prinones that were cut by the inhabitants in a controlled manner, using a system imposed by the community and the church, and they had to pay a price for this as their share. There were also some mechanisms in place. The ceremonial disorder, for instance, for keeping the forest open and prevent forest fires. The forest was protected the year over, but these inhabitants were able to clear the under canopy of the forest, like some shrubs and some bushes, as you can see, cedars or purnaria. So the children could go and clear the forest and use these branches for the bonfire, which is called Zamala in Ioannina. So it's a bonfire that is lit during Apokria, which is a Greek carnival. Foraging was also a way, and grazing was allowed to clean these forests, but there we had management manners that are linked to the sacred forest. Here you can see the Agios Nikolaos feast. It's celebrated on the 20th of May, when the saint's remains were moved from Bari, so grazing was allowed, but after the annual local celebration, because the people participating in the feast would have to find it in a good position, in a good place, in a good condition. So after the annual celebration was over, the forest could be grazed in the following year. And as you can see, this is still grazed as a forest. This photograph is just a few years ago. And the forest remains clear and clean, so it's more difficult for it to be set ablaze by wildfire. When we're talking about forests, we don't necessarily mean a dense forest that we have in our minds as a stereotype. It can be a wood pasture that has this savanna-like picture, or dehesas and montados in Spain and Portugal. There, the trees themselves, like these oak trees of Troy, the Macedonian oak, have very thick trunks that can deal with a crawling wildfire. Many a time, fire is used in such areas as a management measure. Now, in this picture, which is a rather old picture, it's a decade-old photograph, we can see that vegetation, natural vegetation, has started growing again due to abandonment. And today, unfortunately, this place does not give the sense of a wood pasture, but of a dense forest that is very vulnerable to forest wildfires. So, if in the past these sacred forests were a visual code in the landscape that says, here is a forest, today, due to the abandonment, they no longer have this distinct form. The bottom left, you can see a picture from Kalliopi. You can see the whole area is overgrazed, and what you can see in the circle is the sacred forest of the village, which is called Megala Purnaria, because there we have perennial trees that look like the church forests of Ethiopia. We have a cultivated area, and these forests look like oases of green. However, today the situation and the picture that these forests have is not the same. You can see the same place that I showed you earlier in the 1890 photograph. This is 1945 on the left. The two sacred forests of the same village of Kalliopi are easily distinguishable in the landscape. What is not distinguishable is the village itself. It looks like a pile of rocks. However, on the right-hand side photograph, that is a 2007 to 2009 photograph, you can see that due to the abandonment, people are leaving villages the same way they're leaving the islands, and they gather in big cities or Athens, or they just migrate abroad. What happens is a continuum that starts from the forest and now actually menaces and threatens the settlement itself. There is always the risk of a forest wildfire. You can see the population, 25,000 people in 40 villages all over Azaghori in the beginning of 2 centuries ago. The population today is approximately 2,500 people. There are villages with 10 inhabitants, and the largest one has something like 200 inhabitants. So this is the situation, these are the conditions in which we still have some values that are related to the sacred forest and still remain unwavering, like the protective character, the aesthetic values, the festive places, and of course spirituality. People no longer need reserve forests because there is no grazing of the land and very few people breed animals. Many have turned their selves to tourism, and not many people fear these superstitions about supernatural punishments and taboos. We do have some new values, like the value for nature conservation, given that the sacred forests of Epirus are considered as one of the oldest protected areas in the world since 1650. We have protection of biodiversity, primarily because these forests contain ancient trees that are over 200 years old. The oldest one that we have measured is something like 400 years old. So they maintain a particular biodiversity that is linked to ancient trees. And of course today sacred forests are defined as parts of the cultural landscape and cultural heritage. Now, taking in consideration the reports, you can see a UNESCO report for forests included in the UNESCO catalogues, either in mixed landscapes or other landscapes. There are some threats that are highlighted in yellow that also fit our case of the sacred forests of Epirus. Climate change and severe weather are among the first to mention as threats, and I should like to add that a collateral result are also insect explosions or booms or surges that can threaten such forests. You can see in the left-hand side photograph from the fungi that was published in 1920 from the Kew Botanical Gardens in the UK. You can see on the cover a burning forest. Now, the other threats have nothing to do with us because they have to do with other areas, and our area is abandonment. That's the problem in our area. So century-old trees and millennial trees, because here you can see a very recent publication that's about a month ago, they have their own threats to deal with. So our element, due to the fact that it contains a centennial rather than millennial trees, has different threats. That are threats against these very particular and special ecosystems, the ancient forests. Now, taking the threats from the inventory of intangible cultural heritage, we can also see what the modern threats are, that are natural disasters, unchecked tourism, globalization and cultural homogenization, lack of support, appreciation and understanding of the good per se. And the challenge is to be able to preserve this good, this heritage, and pass it on to future generations, to keep it alive within communities and also across generations. Unfortunately, we still have issues of wood felling. These are photographs from this year, 2022, from one such forest. And we will continue our efforts, we still do, in terms of information communication. We've organized many day events for the people. We have our classes, some documentaries, we have scientific publications and research ongoing, and we participate in work teams like the one by IUCN on cultural and spiritual significance of nature and sacred areas in the planet, on the planet rather. We have produced educational material on centennial trees, their values and importance for biodiversity conservation. And we chose trees precisely because we believe that they're more vulnerable than the forest itself, but more easily understood by educators and students alike. Now, people always love stories, and trees, as long-living organisms, have many stories told for them. There is a fairy tale that I wrote about a tree of our little world, that talks about how the tree can become the center of spiritual life. And one last project that we have ongoing now, it was written for the Natural Park of Cephalonia and the trees that are there. It's, again, a story about the millennial trees of the world. And to honor the co-organizers of this event, we have a tree from China, the great king Gigo, which is 4 to 4.5 thousand years old. It is a tree that spans across 5 generations of trees, because each generation lives for about 1,000 years. And I like the popular name that the people there give it, which is called the tree grandfather grandchild, because the grandfather that will plant it will not see the fruits of their planting, but it will be the grandchild that will experience it. We should remember that centennial trees help us understand climate change, particularly because the changes in climate are depicted in the breadth of their annual growth rings, and there is a centennial tree that was probably the oldest tree in the world, living on the White Mountains in America, and it was sacrificed to give researchers, and by sacrificed I mean it was felled, to provide researchers the information they needed for the research of climate. It was called Prometheus, and hence an organization was created to save centennial trees. Our next steps, although sacred forests, as I hope I've shown you with this presentation, they were planned to mitigate in this extreme environment of mountains some impacts of climate change. We consider that in order to see what will happen in the future, it is necessary to have a participatory safeguard plan of this good, so that we can, with the participation of all these people who need to be involved in this good and its protection, that is on the one hand a natural organism and on the other hand a living monument, so that we can preserve them and safeguard them for the future. Thank you so very much for the attention. Thank you very much, Dr. Stara and Mrs. Stara. I think that it is time to have a 30-minute break, and we will come back with the round table, where we will have the possibility to see some of the issues that arose during the presentations we've already had. Of course, Mrs. Stara as well, Kalliopi, provided us with some very salient food for thought. So in 30 minutes we will be back.